Hey YouTube, welcome back to my channel, Taylor Talks Tales. Today I have a very fun video for you guys. I am going to be talking about my top favorite Stephen King books. I wanted to do this for a while and figured I should just go ahead and start. So these are my personal favorites. I've read a lot of his work. I haven't read everything. I haven't gotten to the Institute, and there's some older books of his that I haven't read that are some of the more obscure, lesser known titles. But I've read quite a bit. So out of everything, these are my favorites. It was very hard to pick, and it's sort of in loose order, not necessarily. It's just kind of, I'm gonna pick from a couple. The books towards the end of this list are, I would say, my favorites of all the books on this list. So anyway, let's get started. So first book I want to mention is pretty popular, I would say, and that's Stephen King's Carrie. So this book, it's his first book, and it's not necessarily one of his stronger works, I would say. It's not, you know, there's a lot more out there that's more impactful, and his writing has improved, but there's just something about this book, I think, for me anyway, that is just steeped with nostalgia, because I read this book when I was in middle school, and I really identified with Carrie quite a bit. I really felt for her. I felt very sympathetic for her. It was a book that dealt with bullying, and I was dealing with bullying myself and adjusting to living in a new place, and reading this book was just very powerful because there was a character who was kind of like me. Granted, I don't have telekinetic powers, but made me want them. So for me, this just, it was there for me during a time when I needed it. Kind of like with Christine. There's also bullying in Christine. But if I had to pick between the two, I feel like this story I connect with a little bit more than with Christine, so this one was the one that made the list. But really enjoyed this book. I think a lot of people know the story. It's about a girl named Carrie. She's abused by her mother. She's picked on by her classmates. She discovers that she has telekinetic powers, and things start to escalate from there. So this one is a good one. Go check it out. Next one is, I really enjoy this book a lot, and I like to recommend it to people who don't necessarily like horror, but they're wanting to get into Stephen King, and that's The Green Mile. So The Green Mile was originally published in like a series of like 6 serial novels, and then it, you know, ended up being put into one book, and there's a movie adaptation of this that's fantastic. Pretty much this story follows a man named John Coffey, who is convicted of raping and murdering 2 little girls, and sort of his story, but also the story of some of the other characters involved in this prison. It's sad, heartbreaking, beautiful. It's very character driven. I feel like this is one of Stephen King's more literary novels. Definitely you're gonna have some strong feelings, and there's a character in here named Percy, I believe, who is one of like the most well written, and just, he's almost like the Umbridge of Stephen King, if that makes sense, where he just, this character just, he's one of the best antagonists, I think, because you just hate him and he's just so bad. But because he's so written so well, and there's magical realism, I would say. The supernatural doesn't really play a big, strong role in this, but that's not what the story is about. It's really following just these characters, and all the themes of it are really strong and beautiful, I think, so definitely check this out. I was torn between putting this and 11/22/63 on this list, but I put this one because it just gets me every time. It's beautiful. It's really, really well done, so definitely check it out. Okay, another one I wanted to put on here. This one is also, for me personally, just because I had such a really good time reading this book, and it was part of this experience I had reading it, and it's Full Dark No Stars. This is a short story collection of Stephen King's. The movie that's on Netflix in 1922 is based off of a story from this, and I have no idea why, but this short story collection, because Stephen King has so many wonderful short story collections out there, but this one stands out to me, I think, because I read it in college when I had my own apartment, and it was on break, and a lot of people had left the other apartments around me, but I hadn't yet, and I was sick. And for whatever reason, reading this gave me like a bunch of weird fever dreams, and it freaked me out. And so that's, I think, why I just have such fondness for this book, but I really enjoyed the stories in here too. There's a lot of good imagery and it really sticks with you, so that's why I enjoyed this short story collection. It's tied up there with different seasons for my favorite short story collection. I put this one on here, one, because I have a copy of it, and two, because I just have that extra nostalgic factor in my own personal life, but, you know, either this or different seasons are good examples of his short story writing abilities. Okay, next one. I feel like this book needs to get more love, so I want to talk a little bit about it. And that's Bag of Bones. So Bag of Bones was a fairly recent read for me. I'd seen the miniseries and a long time ago, and I read it and liked it. But this was a reread, and upon rereading it, it added a lot more to it. And I realized this is such a well done book. It's, I think, a little long in parts, and I think that's what deters some people from it, because it was a little slow at the beginning and there's like some slow parts, but the depictions of grief in this book and the writer's block this character's experiencing and just how everything in this book comes together really beautifully. And there's definitely really sad parts, and the more I read it, the more I'm like, this is actually really well done, and it really is a good story. The supernatural elements are creepy and I liked it, but they also kind of take a backseat towards the character and all the other characters and a lot of stuff going on. And it just seems like, I know there are some people who talk about this book, but it's not one of the more well-known Stephen King books, I would say, in terms of, you know, like It or The Stand or something. So I definitely think people should give this one more of a shot because it's really well done, in my opinion. Alright, next one is Under the Dome, and look just how beastie of a book this really is. It is huge. I remember my mom picking this up for me from Costco when it first came out. I really wanted it and was super excited. She handed it off to me and I just sat down and just kept reading and reading and reading, and it took me a while to get through, but I got through it and really enjoyed it. So this one spawned a TV miniseries that the first couple episodes I was sort of interested in, and then I just completely lost interest. And then there's like a second and third season or something. I don't know. The show, if you saw the show, please still give this one a shot because they are totally different. Different feels, a lot of things were changed, and this is just a much more enjoyable read, I would say. And I think this book, there's a trope that I really like of small towns losing their minds. Whether it's disaster or evil presence or who knows what. I just like it when small towns lose their mind, and I love survival stories and I like apocalyptic stories. And this book has really sort of this survival element to it, and the small town kind of losing their mind because they're trapped under this dome, and then you're figuring out what's going on. It's not a perfect book, but I enjoyed it a lot. I thought it's a lot of fun, and you really get to know a lot of these characters and just see things sort of from like a bird's eye point of view through a lot of the story, so you really can kind of see how things come together and play out. So I definitely enjoyed Under the Dome and think it was worth the like almost 1,200 pages or something. I forgot exactly how long that is, but it's a pretty beastie of a book. Next one is also a massive book as well, and totally worth the read, and that's It. So It is classic Stephen King. I know it's up there on many people's top list, usually in the first, second, or third spot, and I enjoy it a lot. There are a couple books that are ahead of it on my personal list just because of various reasons, reading at a point in my life, etc., but this is classic horror. This is, 200 years from now, I feel like people, as long as we haven't blown ourselves up yet anyway, or, the planet dies or something, but if human beings are still around in 200-300 years, I feel like they will still be reading this book because it's a masterpiece. It deals with, childhood and becoming adult and coming of age and fears and just so much more. There's just a lot in this book that I really enjoyed. And it also has the trope of friends coming together to fight something. And I've always really liked that because growing up as a kid, I moved around quite a bit, and I never really had that like friendship group. Like I had some friends, but I never had a friendship group, and I always wanted a friendship group, and even to this very day at 27 years old, I really want that friendship group and finding people who would like do anything for you and you do anything for them. And I like that. And also stories where you have to face your fears, I really enjoy a lot. So this is classic, definitely worth checking out, even though there is one scene that a lot of people don't like. And if you've read the book, you'll know what scene I'm talking about. I personally think that not reading a book solely for like a 2 or 3 page scene is a little immature. I'm kind of hoping that maybe this book will be released at some point without that scene in it, so that way the people who are like refusing to read this book can still check it out. But it's a very short scene, and I actually knew somebody who refused to read any more Stephen King books because of that one scene, and I don't know. I think you should still give him a shot because he's a fantastic storyteller and author, and a lot of his stories are very impactful. So even if there's like a one icky scene in here that is questionable, I still think the book itself is still worth it, because I mean that's like a couple pages out of like, gosh, this copy is like, yeah, 1,100 pages. So just ignore it, keep plowing through. Story is excellent. Okay. Only a couple more. Next one I want to talk about, I feel like deserves a lot more love. So much more love. And that's Revival. So Revival, pretty much you follow this character named Jamie and his life and how it intersects with this pastor and then ex-pastor, and deals with a lot of questions of the afterlife and also addiction and coming of age and all of that. And I know this book is not for everyone, because the ending, I loved the ending. I like intense stuff, and I didn't, it went a place where I was kind of horrified about in a good way, where I'm like, whoa, it really stuck with me, it shocked me, and it really brought the whole story together for me. I know some people didn't like it, but for me, it just was really neat. And also Revival, like the whole concept of it plays out multiple times throughout the story, so the title is just so perfect, and the themes and the imagery and the symbolism, I really enjoyed it a lot. I do think this one's a little slow. The first time I read it, I've officially read it twice now, the first time I read it, because I didn't exactly know the direction the story was going in, felt a little slow for me, so I was just kind of trying to read through, and then it picked up, and then when it really picks up, it's a wild ride, and then it ends and you're like, whoa. So even the second time around, even though I knew it was coming, it still was shocking. So I enjoyed this a lot, and I think it needs a little bit more love in this community, because it's one of his better ones, I would say, of his newer works. So go check it out. Okay, we're getting into the top stories. So next one I have on my list is Pet Sematary. I don't think a Stephen King top reads book would be complete, or top reads list would be complete without this book. It's so good and dark, bleak. It explores so much grief, family, what you would do for a loved one, what's right and wrong, loss, just so much. And like that, the way the story is told too is like, it's a fairly straightforward story, but never feels like a straightforward story, and you're just following this family, and it just gets darker and darker and darker, and it is a bit of a bleak story, and it's very sad, and it's just atmospheric too. Reading it, I've read this multiple times now. It's so good. And the new movie was not good at all. I hated the new movie. The original movie I thought was like decent, but source material is always the best, and this dives in much deeper, I think, than the movie does. And there are just some lines in here where they're just really memorable, and you just really feel for the characters, and you feel for the main character, and you just see everything. It's gonna end poorly, but you're still following and hoping maybe things will work out. But it's great. I think you should definitely check this one out if you haven't, but it's definitely one of my favorites. Alright, top 3. Here we go. So, number 3 is The Shining. I love The Shining. I didn't realize how much I liked it until I reread it not too long ago. And I try to separate the book and the movie, because the movie is good, but it's good in a different way, and it's a bad adaptation of this book. So I really try to keep them separate. Just think, similar storyline, but they're almost like different entities in a way. Because The Shining, the book, it dives in a lot deeper into all of these issues and these characters, and Jack himself is a much more sympathetic character in this. In the movie, he's like kind of already unhinged to begin with. Jack Nicholson plays him as this very haha, I'm kind of a jerk, and I'm, kind of crazy from the get-go, as opposed to in this book, Jack, it's almost tragic to really watch him descend from trying to be a father figure who is trying to get his act together. He, feels awful for what has happened. He uproots his family so he can work on his play, and, the themes of family and addiction, especially with his alcoholism, plays a role in this, and it does in the movie, but it's portrayed, I think, more as almost like a scarier but also sadder thing in this, where he genuinely wants to try and be better, and he wants to break the cycle of abuse and addiction. He wants to be a good father, and the fact that his mind starts to play tricks on him, and this place becomes poisonous and toxic and just drags him down, and then drags his wife and son down with him. And I feel like reading that is a much more impactful story, and the way it's written is just wonderful. This is, I think, Stephen King's 3rd book, but it just is a masterpiece. It's, I think, gonna go down as one of his all-time best books, just because of how much he put in here and how impactful it is and memorable, and the questioning of what's real, what's not. I felt like, is much more powerful in the book than in the movie. And you also get the introspection, and you get the characters' thoughts and feelings and processes, and, I definitely think checking out the book, even if you've seen the movie, is a great idea, because you're in for a treat, I think, because it's a powerful book. Alright, last 2. So, my second favorite is Needful Things. So, Needful Things, I feel like more and more people have been talking about Needful Things than a while ago, because when I was in high school and college, when people talked Stephen King, they typically didn't seem to mention Needful Things a whole lot, and I always wanted to talk about Needful Things because it's one of my favorite Stephen King books. It has that trope, of course, of small town losing its mind and things coming together, where you can kind of see a lot of this foreshadowing happening, or just one action impacts another action, and then all of this, leads up to this, and this, this avalanche of decisions comes crashing down, and so that is pretty much what this book is about. So Leland Gaunt, he owned this shop, secondhand store, basically, called Needful Things, and when you go in there, you will find this object of your dream, basically, something you have to have. And he deals not just with money, but with deeds. And it goes from there, and it actually is, I feel like, the premise of it is a fairly simple, straightforward book, premise, but he takes it and does so much with it. And, it's a pretty long book, but for me, it didn't feel like a long book. And I've read this multiple times, and it still, I really enjoy watching what happens. And I enjoy watching what motivates these characters to do these things, and how this person's actions impact this person and that person, and just the descent into chaos. And oh, it's so good. I love it so much. So I think this is completely underrated. I like to talk about this and promote it, and think more people should definitely check it out, because it's just fun, and there's kind of I think even the character of Leland Gaunt is entertaining. When this was featured in Rick and Morty, I was like, ah! I haven't watched Rick and Morty in a long time, but I do remember that's probably my favorite episode, just because I liked how Needful Things kind of came in to that story, because it's a really good story. So definitely check this one out if you haven't. So my number one, and if you've been following my channel long enough, or if you know me, you know what the number one spot is going to be, but I still want to talk about the book anyway, and that is The Stand. This copy in particular means a lot to me, actually, because my mom bought it before I was born, because this book's older than me, and she bought it when the miniseries was coming out, because she wanted to read the book before she saw the miniseries. And what's funny is, like, my mom typically doesn't like horror movies or books or scary anything, but she does like Stephen King, and she was interested in the Stand book and the miniseries, so she got it, and I inherited this copy. This was the first Stephen King book I read, and I read this copy. So for me, there's just a lot of memories associated with this actual physical book, and there's a lot of memories associated with the actual story. I was 11 years old when I read this. May have been a little on the young side for parts of it, but that was okay. And it took me a while to get through, but when I did, I was just stunned, because this was sort of this leap from, I was reading stuff, obsessively reading Harry Potter and anything with like magic, and was kind of transitioning into horror, because I loved horror, but I was reading kids horror, and then all of a sudden I went from that to picking this up, and I thought it was just, it blew me away. And since then I've reread it every couple of years, and just fall in love with it more and more every time. There's more details you can pick out. I also highly recommend making sure you read the unabridged version. There is an abridged version out there, but the unabridged, I think how many, almost like 1,200 pages of this book. I think it all adds to it, because there's a lot of plot going on, but there's a lot of character development too, and just, yeah, I never feel like I'm reading this gigantic tome per se, because I'm just engrossed in the story, and I'm in it for the long haul, and I just really love it so much. And it's not just about the plague, because basically, the concept of the story is that humanity is hit by this deadly disease that kills 99% of people, and the survivors are left behind. And so there's almost like two stories in one. You've got the plague, flu, awful disease going around that's killing people, but then you also have, amongst the survivors, there's this almost biblical good versus evil element going on. And rather than being cheesy, because sometimes that can be cheesy in other stories, I feel like it really works with this book. Stephen King does a really good job doing that, and there's so much character building and people that you connect with in this story, makes you think. And there are a lot of really good quotes. Several of my favorite all-time quotes are actually found from this book, so I love it. And if you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend it. I think out of all of these books, this is his best one. I think this is going to go down in history as his just masterpiece. Even though there are a couple others, of course, like Shining, Pet Sematary, they're all fantastic. But I feel like if he's going to be known for one of his books, I feel like it would most likely be this. But you never know. That's sort of objective. It's a little hard sometimes to make those. Oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway. Sorry about that. My dog was kind of walking around and was totally distracting me as soon as I finished up talking about The Stand. So anyway, I want to wrap this video up. I have a couple honorable mentions that I want to put on this video. One, I would say, is Different Seasons, and the other is The Long Walk. I enjoy both of those a lot. So those are kind of honorable mentions. It was really hard to put this list together, and I went back and forth by quite a bit, but ultimately I'm like, nah, I'm pretty happy with this list. I also was thinking about putting On Writing on this list, but I feel like that I use it for different purposes, and that's sort of more of a writing guidebook as opposed to his novels, and I kind of wanted to stick with his novels and his stories. And then one last thing I want to mention too is I have not finished the Dark Tower series. I need to get back to it, so I didn't want to put the Dark Tower on here yet because I had not completed it. So I know there are a lot of Dark Tower fans out there who are probably wondering, wait a minute, you didn't put any Dark Tower story or the Dark Tower on here, but that's one of his, most amazing stories out there, and he put so much time and effort into it. And so I may update this list at some point, and Dark Tower may be on there, but I didn't want to put it on here until I had a chance to read through all of it, just in case. I have talked about a few series, not on this channel, but in person, where I'm like, oh, I love this book series so much, only to find that the last couple of books in the series were awful, and then it kind of ruined the series for me. So I never want to claim that I'm like in love with an entire series until I've actually completed the series. So that's a goal, reading goal of 2020 for me, is to finish my Dark Tower reading. I read the first 3. Now I need to get through the rest, but I'm probably going to go back and reread them just because it's been a while since I read the first 3 Dark Tower books. So anyway, I'm going to cut this video off because it's getting way too long, but those are my favorite Stephen King books. Thank you so much for watching my video. Let me know what your favorite Stephen King books are. I did basically kind of like a top 11-ish or so, because I typically don't necessarily like to restrict myself to a specific number, but if you want to put your top 10 or your top 20, top 5, let me know in the comments below. Please like, comment, rate, subscribe, and I will talk to you guys later.